Cigarette companies were the highest payers of scientists, one of the biggest employers of scientists to make the cigarettes addictive. They moved these addiction specialists to the food department by the thousands. And those scientists weaponize our ultra-processed food.
The problem is, most people don't know that what they're consuming is making them sick. They know junk food is bad, but they don't realize it's causing chronic disease. And neither do their healthcare providers.
Certain demographics are hit harder than others. For example, Black Americans consume on average 80% of their calories from ultra-processed foods. But make no mistake, all Americans are under attack and it's costing us dearly.
American food companies are selling the same exact products overseas without these chemicals, but choose to continue serving us the most toxic version here.
This is the brightness of the Canadian version, and this is the brightness of artificial food dyes. Healthier countries are already showing us how it can be done.
I didn't learn that 82% of independently funded studies show harm from processed food, while 93% of industry-sponsored studies reflect no harm. I certainly did not learn that medical error and medications are the third leading cause of death in the United States.
The USDA and the CDC are all controlled by giant for-profit corporations. Their function is no longer to improve and protect the health of Americans. Their function is to advance the mercantile and commercial interests of the pharmaceutical industry that has transformed them and the food industry.
We could replace that miserable future with something much brighter and healthier if we had the moral and political will to do so.
This is a game. We are getting sick. 9 out of 10 killers of Americans, 90% of medical costs are from a weaponized food system. It's not that complicated. When I say weaponized, I mean that literally. Our processed food industry was created by the cigarette industry. In the 1980s, after decades of inaction, the Surgeon General and the US government finally said that smoking might be harmful. And smoking rates plummeted. We listened to doctors in this country. We listened to medical leadership. And as smoking rates plummeted, cigarette companies with their big balance sheets strategically bought up food companies. And by 1990, the 2 largest food companies in the world were Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, 2 cigarette companies. These cigarette companies moved 2 departments over from the cigarette department to the food department. They moved the scientists. Cigarette companies were the highest payers of scientists, one of the biggest employers of scientists to make the cigarettes addictive. They moved these addiction specialists, world-leading addiction specialists, to the food department by the thousands. And those scientists weaponize our ultra-processed food. That is the problem with ultra-processed food. You have the best scientists in the world creating this food to be palatable and to be addictive.
Ultra-processed foods, the kinds of foods that typically line our supermarket aisles, are engineered to be hyper-palatable and addictive. In fact, according to a study published by Gerhard et al. In 2022, ultra-processed foods meet the exact same criteria for addictive substances as tobacco products. Seminal NIH-funded research clearly shows their obesogenic effect. They drive us to overeat by as much as 800 calories per day, simply due to the quality of the food. This finding was actually precisely replicated and published last week in Japan. This is why America is facing an obesity epidemic. That's not about willpower. It's about the food system. And yet, the most recent Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee appeared to bury their head in the sand, claiming that there is limited evidence that ultra-processed food intake increases risk for obesity in adults.
American children are fat, diabetic, and increasingly miserable as they progress towards middle age. Those yet not captured in childhood by obesity, insulin resistance, high blood sugar, and inflammatory dysfunction are likely to suffer it then, with near certainty by the onset of a declining old age. And expensively so. What might we aim for instead? Slim, healthy, athletic, optimistic, and courageous children. Strong, psychologically integrated, generous adults. Resilient, active, productive seniors still contributing to their communities, combined with either or both of much less spending or much better results for the cost.
When I was 2, I started to limp, and at 7, I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis in 37 joints. At age 8, I was put on injectable immunosuppressants. At 12, I was diagnosed with severe depression and put on antidepressants. At 14, I was diagnosed with idiopathic hypersomnia, and I could barely get out of bed for years. My hip and ankle were replaced when I was 17 from the arthritis that wasn't managed by the medications I was on, and I spent a year on OxyContin, limping around what felt like broken bones, trying to stay hopeful and not kill myself. I went to university for biomedical science when it became apparent that nobody in the medical system could help me, and the life-saving treatments I was on weren't saving my life. When I was 23, I completely changed my diet, which was radical, and I didn't think it was going to work. I removed processed foods and only ate whole foods, primarily meat, and my life changed rapidly. I felt like I had stepped out of hell I didn't know that I was trapped in, into heaven. It turned my world upside down. Then I had to get off of the medications I was on. Antidepressant withdrawal, that neither me nor my doctors knew existed, was worse than the opiate withdrawal I had been through after I was treated with OxyContin. After I stopped taking the 8 medications I was on and had a baby, my autoimmune symptoms and depression started sneaking back in. And willing to do anything to not be sick, this sounds ridiculous, but I tried eating only meat. And by that I mean beef, salt, and water, only, knowing beef was the one food that didn't contribute to my arthritis and depression. Eating only meat put my symptoms into remission again in 6 weeks. I've only been eating beef and lamb for 7 years now in order to keep my symptoms in remission. I'm not on any medication. I have no symptoms of disease. I'm in complete remission after spending 16 years being medicated with multiple joints replaced. I spent 7 years trying to get the medical community to take this seriously and conduct some studies. The plant-free ketogenic diet I'm on, which is what it is, it's gone viral on TikTok, has over 500,000 people following it on social media. The number of Google searches for these ketogenic diets has skyrocketed since about 2017. I have groups online with over 30,000 people who follow the same diet as me for autoimmunity and mental disorders that they've been unable to treat any other way. These people are putting their diseases into remissions after decades. This way of treating disease has garnered international attention from the Times to Fox to Sky News Australia. The problem is, most people don't know that what they're consuming is making them sick. They know junk food is bad, but they don't realize it's causing chronic disease, and neither do their healthcare providers.
This is the Canadian version.
This is the brightness of the Canadian version, just for visibility. And this is the brightness of artificial food dyes. So, of course, Kellogg and other food companies will argue children prefer this over this, just as they would prefer cocaine over sugar. That doesn't make it okay.
But I think... I think we should point out that I don't think Dr. Means would recommend either of those versions.
Got to start somewhere.
Because of our lax regulations and public company incentives to prioritize profits over safety, millions of Americans are constantly subjected to uncontrolled trials of chemicals that are banned or regulated all over the world. While there may be many difficult issues discussed today, this one is easy, because healthier countries are already showing us how it can be done. By adopting the same chemical regulatory approach of healthier developed nations, we can take a significant and absolutely necessary step in both providing safer food and lowering healthcare costs for all Americans. We can reverse this great American poisoning, and we already have a playbook on how to do it. Thank you.
This is Skittles. Notice the long list of ingredient differences. 10 artificial dyes in the US version and titanium dioxide. This ingredient is banned in Europe because it can cause DNA damage. Artificial dyes are made from petroleum, and products containing these dyes require a warning label in Europe that states it may cause adverse effects on activity and attention in children. And they have been linked to cancer and disruptions in the immune system. Our government is letting US food companies get away with serving American citizens harmful ingredients that are banned or heavily regulated in other countries. American food companies are selling the same exact products overseas without these chemicals, but choose to continue serving us the most toxic version here. It's un-American.
We are so busy in our healthcare system, billing and coding and paying each other, and every stakeholder has their gigantic lobby in Washington, D.C., and everybody's making a lot of money, except for one stakeholder, the American citizen. They are financing this giant, expensive healthcare system through their paycheck deduction for health insurance and the Medicare excise tax. As we go down this path of billing and coding and medicating, and can we be real for a second? We have poisoned our food supply, engineered highly addictive chemicals that we put into our food. We spray it with pesticides that kill pests. What do you think they do to our gut lining and our microbiome? And then they come in sick. The GI tract is reacting. It's not an acute inflammatory storm. It's a low-grade chronic inflammation, and it makes people feel sick.
There is compelling evidence that food plays a direct role in mental health. One study of nearly 300,000 people found that those who eat ultra-processed foods daily are 3 times more likely to struggle with their mental health than people who never or rarely consume them.
American health is getting destroyed. It's being destroyed because of chronic illness. And if the current trends continue, if the graphs continue in the way that they're going, at best, we're going to face profound societal instability and decreased American competitiveness. And at worst, we're going to be looking at a genocidal level health collapse in our country and the world.
The 21st century is obese by design. Specific, traceable forms of what's referred to as structural violence are created by the catastrophic quartet of big farming, big food, big pharma, and big insurance. They systematically corrupt every institution of trust, which has led to the global spread of obesity and disease. Dysfunctional and destructive agricultural legislation like the Farm Bill favors high-yield, genetically engineered crops like corn and soy, leading to the proliferation of empty calories, saturated with all of these toxins that we've been talking about today for 3 hours, and it seems like we can never say enough about it. And then this glut of cheap calories provides a boon to the food industry giants. They just turn it into a bounty of ultra-processed, factory-assembled foods and beverages strategically engineered to undermine your society and foster your dependence like nicotine and cocaine. So we literally cannot eat just one.
It starts with taking a sledgehammer to corruption, to the conflicts in our regulatory agency and in this building. These conflicts have transformed our regulatory agencies into predators against the American people, and particularly our children. 80% of NIH grants go to people who have conflicts of interest, and these scientists are allowed to collect royalties of $150,000 a year on the products that they develop at NIH and then farm out to the pharmaceutical industry. The FDA, the USDA, and the CDC are all controlled by giant for-profit corporations. Their function is no longer to improve and protect the health of Americans. Their function is to advance the mercantile and commercial interests of the pharmaceutical industry that has transformed them, and the food industry that has transformed them into sock puppets for the industry they're supposed to regulate.